They wheeled her out just before dawn. No warning, no discussion. A thin blanket over her legs. A plastic bag with worn clothes pressed into her hands. Kadidiatou Coulibaly did not protest. She had learned that when society decides you are finished, your voice no longer counts. The gate of the care home closed with a dull metal sound. Then engines. 5 black vehicles stopped at the curb at the exact same time. Men stepped out. Calm, unhurried. Their suits didn't belong to this street. Neither did the silence that followed them. The guards froze. Without a word, all 5 men walked toward the old woman. And there on the concrete pavement, they knelt. Mama Kadidiatou. One whispered his composure, cracking, "We're here!" What they did next was not gratitude. It was not revenge. It was something no one was prepared to witness.
Before we continue, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? If stories about hidden kindness, justice, and second chances move, you consider subscribing and staying with us.
Kadidiatou Coulibaly had not planned to become anyone's mother. Motherhood, she believed, required things she did not have: money that stayed, a husband who returned at night, a house that did not threaten to collapse each rainy season. What she had instead were hands hardened by bleach and soap, a back permanently bent from years of scrubbing floors that would never be hers, and a small rented room on the edge of Dakar, where the walls sweated in the heat and the landlord knocked whenever rent was late. She woke before sunrise every day, not because she was disciplined, but because hunger had its own alarm clock. Kadidiatou washed her face with cold water, wrapped her headscarf tightly, and walked toward the city center, while the sky was still pale and undecided. Some days she cleaned offices. Other days she washed clothes for families who never asked her name. She accepted whatever came. Pride was a luxury for people who could afford to eat without counting coins. The city was already awake when she reached the port road. Vendors shouted, buses coughed smoke, men argued over crates of fish, and children, too many children, moved between the chaos like shadows. Kadidiatou noticed them because she always did. They slept in clusters near the old drainage canal, under torn cardboard and rusted sheets of metal. Boys, mostly. Their feet were bare, their shirts oversized donations that no longer remembered their original owners. People stepped over them as if they were cracks in the pavement. Street rats, someone muttered behind her. Kadidiatou flinched, though the words were not aimed at her. She bought a small loaf of bread from a woman she knew and broke it in half as she walked. She told herself she would eat later. She always did. The boys were already awake. One of them, tall for his age with sharp eyes that had learned too early how to measure danger, watched her carefully. Another coughed, his chest rattling in a way that made Kadidiatou's stomach tighten. The smallest boy sat apart, knees pulled to his chest, his gaze fixed on the ground, as if eye contact itself were risky. Kadidiatou stopped. She did not announce herself. She never did. She crouched slowly, keeping her movements open and calm, and placed the bread on a piece of clean paper between them. "For sharing," she said. They stared. Hunger battled suspicion. Finally, the tall boy broke the loaf, carefully counting pieces, with the seriousness of an adult dividing wages. No one spoke. Kadidiatou stood up and walked away, before gratitude could embarrass them. She told herself it would end there. But the city has a way of testing lies. 2 days later, she saw them again, this time running. A shopkeeper was shouting. A stone flew past, missing one boy's head by inches. People joined in, not to ask questions, but to enjoy the chase. The accusation came easily. They steal. Kadidiatou stepped forward before she could think. "They didn't," she said. The crowd barely noticed her. Someone shoved her aside. The boys scattered fear, sending them in different directions like birds startled from wire. Kadidiatou watched the smallest one fall. He did not cry out. He curled inward, protecting himself, the way beaten children do. She stood over him. "That's enough," she said again, louder this time. A few people paused, not because they respected her, but because something in her tone did not ask permission. The moment broke. The shopkeeper turned away. The crowd lost interest. Kadidiatou helped the boy up. His arm trembled under her grip. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated. "Babakar," he whispered. She nodded as if the name were something precious. "Can you walk?" He nodded too. That night, Kadidiatou did something she had never allowed herself to imagine. She returned to the canal with a pot of rice she had cooked using the last of her oil. The boys were there, all 5 of them now watching her, like she might disappear if they blinked. She counted them carefully. The tall one introduced himself as Ibrahima Diallo. His voice was steady, but his shoulders stayed tense, ready to flee. Moussa Traoré spoke next, quieter, his eyes moving constantly, storing details. Kofi Mensah smiled too easily, the kind of smile that learned early how to soften adults. Sekou Kamara said nothing at all, his hands black with grease from scavenged machine parts. And Babakar Ndiaye stayed close to Kadidiatou's knee, as if distance itself were dangerous. She served them without sermons. When they finished, she said the words that would change everything. "You can sleep where I sleep." Silence fell. Even the city seemed to lean in. Ibrahima frowned. "We don't have money." Kadidiatou nodded. "Neither do I." "Your house?" Kofi asked. "A room," she corrected. "One room." They exchanged looks. Years of abandonment had trained them to spot traps. Moussa spoke carefully. Why, Kadidiatou thought of 100 answers and rejected them all. Finally, she said the only one that was true. "Because I can't leave you here." They followed her at a distance at first, through alleys that smelled of rot and salt, past the mosque whose loudspeakers crackled with evening prayer, up the narrow stairs to her room where the ceiling was low and the air thick. The room could barely hold 1 adult comfortably. 5 children made it impossible. Kadidiatou spread an old mat on the floor. She used her own blanket to cover Babakar. She sat against the wall and did not sleep, listening to unfamiliar breathing fill the space. Fear and hope wrestled inside her chest until dawn. The next morning, the landlord noticed. "What is this?" he demanded, staring at the boys as if they were termites. Kadidiatou met his eyes. "They're with me. They are trouble." "So is hunger," she replied. He warned her. The neighbors whispered. Women shook their heads and said she was foolish. Men laughed and said she was inviting disaster into her room. Kadidiatou heard all of it. She also heard the sound of 5 boys eating breakfast together for the first time in who knew how long. She saw Sekou silently fix a broken chair. She watched Moussa read a discarded newspaper out loud, stumbling but determined. She felt Babakar's hand grip hers as if she were an anchor. That morning, as she left for work, Kadidiatou paused at the door. "Wait for me," she said. They nodded. For the first time in years, she walked into the city carrying more than her own survival. She carried 5 lives, and somewhere deep inside her, a fear she did not yet name whispered the truth. Loving them would cost her everything. By the 3rd day, the room no longer felt like a shelter. It felt like a challenge. Kadidiatou Coulibaly woke before the boys, careful not to disturb the fragile order that had settled overnight. 5 bodies lay on the floor in uneven lines, feet touching backs turned instinctively, guarding one another even in sleep. The air was thick with sweat and dust. Her single window let in just enough light to show the truth. There was no space left to pretend this was temporary. She stepped outside quietly and washed her face at the communal tap. Women were already there, filling buckets, talking. Their voices dipped when they saw her. "Did you hear?" one whispered, not quietly enough. She brought street boys into her room. 5 of them. Is she mad? Kadidiatou kept her eyes on the water. She had lived long enough to know that explanations only fed judgment. When she returned, the boys were awake. Ibrahima was sitting upright, back against the wall, alert. Musa crouched near the window, watching the alley below as if mapping escape routes. Kofi had found an old spoon and was tapping it against a cup, humming softly. Sekou examined the broken door hinge with the concentration of a craftsman twice his age. Babacar stood frozen, unsure where to place his feet in a room that was not meant for him. Kadidiatou cleared her throat. "We need rules." All 5 heads turned. "Not prison rules," she added calmly. "Life rules." They listened, not because they trusted her yet, but because no one had ever offered them rules that weren't threats. "No stealing," she said first. Kofi nodded quickly. Ibrahima's jaw tightened. "No fighting in this room." Musa glanced at the others, measuring. "If you leave, you tell me where." Babacar's shoulders relaxed slightly. "And if someone speaks to you with cruelty?" She paused. "You don't answer with the same." Ibrahima frowned. "What if they hit us?" Kadidiatou met his eyes. "Then you come home." Home. The word landed carefully, like something fragile placed on a table. She divided the day. School was not yet possible. Papers, fees, questions she couldn't answer. But work existed everywhere. She sent Kofi with a basket to help vendors carry goods. Sekou followed an old mechanic who owed Kadidiatou a favor. Musa stayed to clean and organize the room, lining their few possessions with obsessive care. Ibrahima went to the port to load crates. Babacar stayed with her, his fingers curled into her dress. By afternoon, the landlord arrived. He stood in the doorway, blocking the light, his eyes sweeping over the boys with open disgust. "This is not what we agreed. We agreed I pay rent," Kadidiatou replied evenly. "You agreed to live alone." She nodded. "Circumstances change." His voice hardened. "Those children bring police, trouble, disease. They bring no more trouble than hunger," she said again. He laughed. "You think love feeds mouths." "No," Kadidiatou said. "Work does, and we are working." He gave her 1 week. The neighbors did not wait that long. By evening, rumors had reached the block. Someone said the boys were thieves. Someone else said Kadidiatou was running a den. A woman she once shared tea with crossed the street to avoid her. Children pointed. That night as they ate rice thinned with water, Musa spoke. "They hate us," he said quietly. Kadidiatou did not deny it. Some people hate what reminds them they could have fallen too. Ibrahima slammed his hand against the floor. "We should leave." Babacar looked up sharply. "No." All eyes turned to the smallest boy. "She didn't send us away," Babacar said, voice shaking. "We don't send her away." Silence followed. Something unspoken passed between them. A line, drawn not in words but in loyalty. The next days were harder. A police officer stopped Ibrahima near the port and searched him without cause. Musa was chased from the tap by older boys who called him names he pretended not to hear. Kofi came home with fewer coins each evening, his jokes growing thinner. Sekou returned with oil-stained hands and a quiet pride from fixing a broken generator for scraps. Babacar learned the layout of the room, by heart placing objects exactly where they belonged, as if order itself could protect them. Kadidiatou watched them closely. She saw how Ibrahima positioned himself between her and strangers, how Musa listened more than he spoke, absorbing the world like evidence, how Kofi counted coins twice, then 3 times, how Sekou fixed what others discarded, how Babacar flinched at raised voices and relaxed only when her hand rested on his shoulder. They were not one story. They were 5. On the 6th day, trouble arrived wearing a smile. A man stood at the corner watching the boys return from work. He dressed well for the area, clean shoes, confident posture. When Kofi passed, the man spoke softly. "You're wasting your talent carrying baskets." Kofi slowed. "I'm working." The man smiled wider. "There are easier ways." Kadidiatou noticed him too late. She felt the shift in the air before she saw the conversation. That night she spoke firmly. "If anyone offers you money for nothing, you refuse." Ibrahima looked away. Musa's eyes narrowed. Sekou said nothing. Kofi swallowed. Babakar moved closer to her. "They recruit where hope is thin," Kadidiatou continued, "and they disappear when consequences arrive." Ibrahima finally spoke. "What if hope is thinner here?" Kadidiatou sat down heavily. Her body ached. Her hands smelled permanently of soap and labor. She had no savings, no protection, only stubborn faith in something she could not name. "Then we make it thicker," she said. That night after the boys slept, Kadidiatou opened the small metal box she kept hidden beneath her mat. Inside were coins wrapped in cloth and a yellowed envelope. She did not open it. She never did. It was enough to know it existed. Inside that envelope lay a truth from 30 years ago. A truth about land-taken voices silenced, and a moment when she had chosen survival over justice. She had sworn never to let another child pay for that choice. The room shifted as she stood. The boys breathed steadily, unaware of the weight settling over her chest. Kadidiatou Coulibaly lay down among them, not above, not apart. If the world insisted on calling them unwanted, she would prove it wrong one day at a time, even if it destroyed her. The week the landlord gave them passed faster than Kadidiatou Coulibaly expected, not because time moved kindly, but because survival demanded speed. By the 7th morning, the boys' routines had sharpened into habit. Ibrahima left before sunrise for the port shoulders, squared eyes forward, carrying himself like a man who had learned early that hesitation invited punishment. Musa swept the room meticulously, lining their few bowls with military precision before heading to the public library where no one asked for papers as long as he stayed quiet. Kofi worked the market calculating routes and customers with a natural instinct for numbers that vendors both exploited and admired. Sekou spent hours beside rusted engines and broken fans, trading silence for skill. Babakar stayed close to Kadidiatou, following her to cleaning jobs where employers pretended not to see him. The city watched them. It always did. At first the glances were curious, then they hardened. Women pulled their children closer when the boys passed. Shopkeepers locked boxes earlier. Someone painted a word on the wall near Kadidiatou's building overnight. "Thieves." She scrubbed it away before dawn, her hands shaking. Not from fear, but from anger she did not allow herself to show. The school was her next hope. She waited in line beneath a faded banner promising education for all. When it was her turn, she spoke carefully, explaining that the boys had no parents, no documents, no money, but they were willing to learn. The administrator listened with a tired smile. "Madame, rules exist for a reason. Rules protect those already inside." Kadidiatou replied. The smile disappeared. "Come back when you have papers." She left without arguing. Arguing required power. That afternoon, Ibrahima did not come home on time. Kadidiatou tried not to panic. The port delayed everyone. Trucks arrived late. Men argued. Still the sun lowered and the room grew darker. When he finally appeared, his shirt was torn, his lips split. "They searched me," he said simply. "Who?" Kadidiatou asked, already reaching for water. He shrugged. "Police. They said someone reported boys like us." "Like us." She cleaned his wound slowly, her jaw tight. The others watched in silence. Babakar's hands balled into fists he did not know how to use. "This is why we leave," Ibrahima said, not looking at her. "We make things worse." Kadidiatou cupped his face gently. "No, the world was already worse. You're just standing where it can see itself." The next blow came quietly. One of Kadidiatou's employers, a woman who paid little but regularly, told her not to return. "My neighbors talk," she said, eyes avoiding Kadidiatou's. "They say you bring danger." Kadidiatou nodded. She had expected this. What she had not expected was the sudden lightness that followed, as if something heavy had finally admitted its weight. They adjusted again. Meals grew thinner, rice stretched further, coins vanished faster, nights filled with whispered calculations. Musa suggested selling scrap. Kofi proposed pooling tips. Sekou quietly fixed the landlord's broken radio without being asked. Babacar learned to fold blankets so tightly they took up less space. Still trouble circled. One evening, the man with clean shoes returned. This time he spoke to Ibrahima directly. "You're strong," he said. "Strength shouldn't go unpaid." Ibrahima said nothing. The man smiled. "We help our own." Ibrahima came home late, silent. Kadidiatou saw the change immediately. She waited until the others slept. "Did he offer you something?" she asked. Ibrahima stared at the floor. "Food, protection. And what did he want?" "Deliveries." Kadidiatou closed her eyes. She had known this day would come. The city always demanded payment for mercy. She opened the metal box again. Not for the envelope, but for the last of her coins. She placed them in Ibrahima's palm. "This is not much," she said, "but it's clean." Ibrahima's voice broke. "It's not enough." "No," she agreed. "But neither is selling yourself to men who disappear when you fall." He returned the coins slowly. "I won't." The relief that flooded her hurt more than fear ever had. The landlord came the next morning. He did not knock. "I gave you a week," he said, eyes scanning the boys. "This ends today." Kadidiatou stood straight. "Give me one more." He laughed. "For what a miracle." "No," she said. "For proof." "Proof of what?" "That they're not what you think," he scoffed. "Children like this only become criminals." Before Kadidiatou could respond, Sekou stepped forward. He held out the radio. "I fixed it," he said quietly. "For free." The landlord hesitated, surprised. He turned the dial. Music crackled to life. Musa spoke next. "I clean the library every afternoon." "Ask them." Kofi added. "I carry goods without stealing." "Ask the vendors." Babacar said nothing. He simply took Kadidiatou's hand. The landlord's face hardened again. "Stories." Kadidiatou met his gaze. "Then watch us." Something shifted. Not enough to save them, but enough to delay the verdict. "You have until the end of the month," he said finally. "One complaint and you're out." That night, exhaustion wrapped around Kadidiatou like a second skin. She sat on the floor while the boys slept, staring at the envelope beneath the mat. 30 years ago, she had been young too. Poor too. She had seen men with power steal land from families who screamed until their voices cracked. She had been offered money to forget. She had forgotten. The memory burned, now resurfacing with every injustice the boys faced. She wondered how many times silence repeated itself across generations. Outside, laughter echoed from the street. Inside, 5 children breathed in uneven rhythm. Kadidiatou pressed her forehead to the wall. "If I fail you," she whispered. Not sure who she was speaking to, "it will not be because I didn't fight." The city did not answer. But somewhere beyond the walls, a chain of consequences had already begun to form. Quiet, patient waiting. The accusation came on a market day. That was how it always happened, when noise was loud enough to bury truth, when crowds were dense enough to choose a villain quickly. Kadidiatou Coulibaly had just finished scrubbing the back room of a fish stall when she heard shouting ripple through the street, sharp and excited, the kind that fed on itself. "Stop them, thieves! Someone catch them!" Her hands froze in the bucket. She knew before she saw anything. Fear had a specific weight in her chest now, and it moved faster than thought. Kadidiatou dropped the brush and pushed through the crowd, her heart pounding with each step. Near the spice stalls, a circle had formed. In the center stood Kofi Mensah and Musa Traoré, their faces pale, their hands raised instinctively. On the ground lay an overturned tray of dried peppers, red spilling across the dust like blood. They took my money, the vendor shouted. I saw them. Kofi's mouth opened, then closed again. Musa shook his head, eyes darting, already calculating how badly this could go. They didn't, Kadidiatou said, pushing into the circle. No one moved aside willingly. She forced her way through, standing between the boys and the vendor. You're protecting them because they live with you, someone said. She's part of it, another voice added. The vendor pointed at Kofi. Check his pockets. Hands reached out. No, Kadidiatou said firmly. A man shoved her aside. She stumbled but stayed on her feet. Check mine, she said suddenly. The crowd hesitated. What the vendor scoffed. Check me, Kadidiatou repeated, pulling out her worn purse and turning it upside down. A few coins fell to the ground. Nothing else. If they stole, it's here, she said. If not, you leave them. The vendor hesitated, then shook his head angrily. They work together. Everyone knows street children steal. Kadidiatou felt something inside her snap, not loudly, but completely. She stepped forward and placed herself to vie directly in front of the boys. If something was stolen, she said, her voice calm but unyielding, then I stole it. The crowd went quiet. I'm their guardian, she continued. Their mistakes are mine. Kofi gasped. Mama, enough, she said softly without turning around. The vendor stared at her, surprised. The excitement drained from his face, replaced by irritation. He had wanted drama, not responsibility. Someone else bent down and searched the ground near the stall. A small bundle of coins lay half hidden beneath a sack. There a woman said, "It was here." The accusation dissolved as quickly as it had formed. People shrugged, some laughed awkwardly. The crowd scattered, hungry for the next spectacle. But damage did not need witnesses to exist. Kadidiatou felt the boys shaking behind her. She guided them home without speaking, her arm firm around Kofi's shoulders. Musa walked stiffly, his jaw locked, his mind recording every detail of humiliation. Inside the room, silence settled like dust. They were ready to beat us, Kofi said finally, his voice small. They will be again, Ibrahima replied from the corner. He had seen it all from a distance and arrived just in time to watch the crowd disperse. Babakar sat on the mat, knees, hugged to his chest. Why do they hate us so much? Kadidiatou sat down heavily. Her legs trembled now that the danger had passed. She did not answer immediately, because she did not want to lie. Because she said at last, it's easier than asking why children sleep on streets. That night she did not sleep. The accusation replayed in her mind, not as noise but as pattern. She recognized it too well, the way blame moved toward the powerless, the speed with which truth was crushed under convenience. It was the same shape as 30 years ago. She rose quietly and reached for the metal box. The boys slept, exhausted by fear. Kadidiatou lifted the envelope from its hiding place, her fingers stiff. She sat on the floor and stared at it for a long time. Inside were documents, copies she had kept when the originals were seized. Land records, signatures, names that still carried weight. Proof of a forced eviction that had destroyed an entire neighborhood near the old railway line. Proof that powerful men had lied while families were pushed out under threat. Proof that she had seen it happen. Back then, she had been offered money to stay silent. She had been young, alone, terrified. She had taken the money and told herself she would use it to survive. Survival had lasted. Justice had not. Now, watching 5 children punished for crimes they did not commit, Kadidiatou understood something she had avoided for decades. Silence did not expire. It multiplied. The next morning, the consequences arrived. A police officer knocked on her door. He was polite, almost bored. We received a complaint, he said, about stolen goods, about children staying illegally. Kadidiatou nodded. Come in. The officer surveyed the room, the thin mats, the patched clothes. His eyes lingered on the boys. They don't belong here, he said. "They belong with me. Do you have papers?" "No," he sighed. "Then you make my job difficult." Kadidiatou met his gaze. "And you make their lives impossible." He looked away first. "We'll be watching," he said, and left. When the door closed, Musa spoke quietly. "This will not stop." Kadidiatou knew he was right. That afternoon, she visited an old building near the hospital, a legal aid office that rarely helped people like her. She waited for hours. When she was finally seen, the clerk barely glanced at her. "We can't take cases without fees," he said. Kadidiatou stood up to leave, then paused. "What if I have information?" The clerk hesitated. "What kind?" She thought of the envelope in her box, of the names, of the men who had walked free. "Dangerous," she said. He leaned back. "Then keep it." Kadidiatou left with her heart pounding. At home, the boys waited. Babacar ran to her first relief, flooding his face when she returned. That evening, Kadidiatou gathered them close. "There will be days like today," she said. "Days when the world decides who you are without asking." Ibrahima looked at her. "What do we do?" She hesitated, then spoke the truth she had learned too late. "We stand," she said, "and when standing is not enough, we remember." She did not tell them about the envelope. Not yet. Some burdens required time before they could be shared. Outside the city carried on unaware that a line had been crossed quietly in a small room near the port. The next accusation would not end with silence. Time did not soften the city. It sharpened it. The boys grew not evenly, but unmistakably. Hunger stretched their frames. Work hardened their hands. The narrow room that once swallowed them whole now felt smaller each month, as if the walls themselves were surprised they had lasted this long. Kadidiatou Coulibaly watched the changes with a mixture of pride and fear she did not name. Ibrahima Diallo became taller than the doorframe. His shoulders broadened from lifting crates at the port, his silence turning heavier, more deliberate. Men began to speak to him differently, half respectful, half testing. They sensed strength and wondered who controlled it. Moussa Traoré read everything he could touch. Old textbooks, newspapers wrapped around fish, notices pasted to walls. He asked questions Kadidiatou could not always answer, about laws, about ownership, about why some signatures mattered more than others. He remembered faces. He remembered names. Kofi Mensah learned numbers the way some boys learned fists. He calculated profits before vendors finished speaking. He negotiated route split earnings fairly and hid extra coins for days when someone came home empty-handed. Smiles opened doors for him, but behind the smiles his eyes never stopped measuring risk. Sekou Kamara grew quiet in a way that felt permanent. He spoke to machines more than people. Broken fans, radios, generators. He took them apart and put them back together, learning patience from things that did not lie. When something worked again, he allowed himself a brief smile and nothing more. Babacar Ndiaye changed in smaller ways. He slept better now. He laughed sometimes. But loud voices still made him flinch. Sudden movement still sent him searching for Kadidiatou's hand. He followed rules carefully, as if breaking one might erase his place in the room. Work kept them alive. It did not keep them safe. The man with clean shoes returned often now. He never spoke to all of them at once. He understood separation. He caught Ibrahima alone near the docks, offered him a plate of hot food and a place to sit. He nodded at Kofi across the market, slipped him information about a job that paid twice as much for half the effort. He watched Sekou work and said nothing, because silence was already a language Sekou understood. Kadidiatou felt the pressure, building like heat before a storm. She called them together one evening after supper. The rice was thin, the oil almost gone. "Listen to me," she said. "The city will offer you shortcuts." Ibrahima leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Shortcuts out of hunger." "Yes," Kadidiatou agreed. And into graves, Kofi scoffed softly. Not every job kills you. No, she said. Some take longer. Musa studied her face. You speak like you know. Kadidiatou met his gaze. For a moment, the past pressed against her chest, asking to be let in. She pushed it back. I know enough, she said, to tell you this. Nothing given without work comes without chains. They fell quiet. The next test came quickly. One night Ibrahima did not come home. Kadidiatou waited, pacing the narrow floor, every sound outside sharpening her fear. When the door finally opened, he stood there breathing hard, his shirt torn, his eyes bright with something dangerously close to relief. I made money, he said. He placed notes on the mat. More than Kadidiatou had seen it once in months. Babakar's eyes widened. Kofi stared, calculating. Musa said nothing. Sekou froze mid-motion, where Kadidiatou asked. Ibrahima hesitated. Delivery, from whose silence stretched. Kadidiatou closed her eyes once. Then she reached out and pushed the money back toward him. No. Ibrahima's jaw tightened. You didn't even ask how. I don't need to, she said. I asked who. It was just one time. That's how it starts. He slammed his fist against the wall. We are starving! The word hit the room hard. Kadidiatou flinched, not because it was false, but because it was true. She stood slowly, her joints aching. You think I don't know that I count your breaths at night. I count coins until numbers blur. But I will not trade your future for today. Ibrahima's voice shook. Then what do you offer? Instead, Kadidiatou did not answer immediately. She walked to the metal box. The boys watched her carefully now. She opened it and took out the envelope. Not the contents, just the envelope itself. I offer you this, she said quietly. The truth that silence costs more than hunger. Musa leaned forward. What is it? Something I kept hidden because I was afraid, Kadidiatou said. Something that taught me what happens when you accept money to look away. She returned the envelope to the box and closed it. I won't open it yet, she said. But know this, if I ever do, it will be because the price of silence has become too high. Ibrahima stared at the floor. Slowly, he picked up the money and placed it back into her hands. Burn it, he said hoarsely. Kadidiatou shook her head. No, we return it. They did quietly, dangerously. The man with clean shoes smiled thinly when Ibrahima handed the money back. Another time, he said. Kadidiatou knew there would be another time. The landlord noticed the tension too. You bring attention, he warned her. Attention brings police. Police bring attention, she replied. He did not laugh. Days later, Kadidiatou collapsed. It happened on a staircase she had climbed 1,000 times. Her vision narrowed. The bucket slipped from her hand. She remembered thinking distantly that the floor felt very cold. She woke to bright lights and unfamiliar voices. Hospital, a public ward, thin curtains, the smell of disinfectant and despair. The boys stood at the foot of her bed, their faces pale with fear she had tried to protect them from. Don't cry, she whispered. Babakar burst into tears anyway. The doctor spoke without softness. Exhaustion, malnutrition. She needs rest. With what money? Kofi asked. The doctor shrugged. That's not my concern. They took shifts by her bed. Ibrahima slept, sitting upright, refusing to leave. Musa listened to conversations in the corridor. Sekou fixed a broken fan in the ward without being asked. Kofi negotiated with nurses for extra blankets. Kadidiatou watched them through half-closed eyes. This was what she had fought for. Not comfort, not safety, but connection strong enough to survive fear. As she drifted in and out of sleep, she understood something she had resisted for years. Love did not protect you from danger. It gave danger a reason to aim carefully. And somewhere beyond the hospital walls, Forces that fed on desperation were already adjusting their plans. Kadidiatou Coulibaly remained in the hospital for 3 days. 3 days was not long by medical standards, but in their lives it stretched painfully wide. The ward was loud with coughing, crying arguments over unpaid bills. Privacy did not exist. Dignity survived only in fragments. Kadidiatou lay still, conserving strength she did not yet have, while the boys learned how quickly the world punished those without money. On the first night, a nurse demanded payment before changing her IV bag. "We'll bring it," Kofi said quickly, already calculating what could be sold. By morning, he had borrowed against favors not yet earned. Ibrahima carried crates through the night until his arms trembled. Sekou repaired a broken oxygen stand and accepted coins in thanks. Musa argued with an administrator using words he had memorized from library pamphlets. Babakar stayed at Kadidiatou's side, counting her breaths aloud until she slept. They did not complain. They did not ask why. They simply adapted. On the second day, a man appeared at the foot of Kadidiatou's bed. He was older than the lines on his face suggested. His suit was worn but clean, his posture careful as if age had taught him the cost of sudden movement. He introduced himself quietly. "Amadou Keita," he said. "I'm a lawyer, or I was." Kadidiatou blinked, unsure if the fever had returned. "I volunteer here sometimes," he continued. "Legal aid, when they let me." Musa stiffened immediately. Lawyers meant questions. Questions meant danger. Amadou's gaze moved gently from one boy to another. He saw what others missed, how Ibrahima positioned himself protectively, how Kofi counted silently, how Sekou's eyes flicked to broken fixtures, how Babakar clutched Kadidiatou's blanket. "You raised them," Amadou said. "Not asking." Kadidiatou nodded weakly. Amadou smiled faintly. "They've been raising you, too." He pulled up a chair. "I heard what happened at the market," he said softly. "Accusations travel fast." Musa's eyes narrowed. "Who told you people always talk?" Amadou replied. "Especially when they think they're safe." Kadidiatou shifted pain, tightening her chest. "Why are you here?" Amadou hesitated, then reached into his worn briefcase. He did not take anything out. He simply touched something inside, as if confirming it was real. "Because 30 years ago, he said, a woman like you stood where no one else would." The room went very quiet. Kadidiatou closed her eyes. "You're mistaken." "No," Amadou said gently. "I was a junior lawyer then. Fresh, idealistic. I watched families dragged from their homes near the railway line. I watched documents appear overnight. I watched signatures that didn't belong to the hands that signed them." Kadidiatou's fingers twitched. "There was one witness," Amadou continued. "A cleaning woman. Poor. Alone. She disappeared after the hearing was postponed." Musa leaned forward. "What happened to the case?" Amadou exhaled. It was buried. Silence pressed against the walls. Kadidiatou opened her eyes slowly. "Why are you telling us this now?" "Because Amadou said I recognized your face the moment I saw you in this ward. And because I see history repeating itself around these boys." Ibrahima spoke for the first time. "What do you want?" Amadou met his gaze steadily. "I want to know if the truth still exists." That night, Kadidiatou did not sleep. She watched the ceiling fan turn unevenly and listened to the ward breathe. Memories she had locked away returned in fragments, boots on dirt, women screaming, a hand pushing money into hers while another closed around her wrist. She had thought silence would end it. She had been wrong. On the third day, she asked the boys to gather close. "There is something you need to know," she said. They sat on the edge of the bed, forming a barrier between her and the rest of the world. "I once saw injustice," Kadidiatou began, "big enough to ruin lives. And I said nothing." Musa swallowed. "Why? Because I was afraid," she said simply. Because I was poor. Because they promised me safety. Kofi's voice was quiet. Did it work? Kadidiatou shook her head. I survived. Others didn't. Babakar reached for her hand. She squeezed back. I kept proof, she continued. Not enough to fight alone. Enough to remind myself what silence costs. Ibrahima looked away. And now Kadidiatou said, men who profit from that silence still walk free. The boys exchanged glances. Something unspoken passed between them. Anger, recognition, resolve. Amadou returned that afternoon. I can't promise protection, he told them. Only process, slow, dangerous, necessary. Kadidiatou nodded. That's more than I had before. Amadou glanced at the boys. They will come after you. They already are, Musa said. When Kadidiatou was discharged, the city felt harsher than before. Her legs were weak. Her work had vanished. The landlord waited at the door with folded arms. You missed rent, he said. Kadidiatou did not argue. She bowed her head. Give me time, he sighed. You bring too much attention. The boys stood behind her like a wall. That night they counted coins again. The pile was smaller than it had ever been. We need a plan, Kofi said. Musa nodded. And distance. Ibrahima clenched his jaw. We can't all stay. Kadidiatou understood immediately. You want to leave, she said. We want to survive, Ibrahima replied. The decision formed slowly, painfully. One by one they would go take work farther away. Learn skills, disappear into cities that did not know their past. They would send what they could. They would return when they could. Babakar cried openly. Sekou stared at the floor. Kofi calculated routes. Musa memorized faces. Kadidiatou held them all. This is not abandonment, she said. This is strategy. They left in stages, Ibrahima first, then Kofi, then Sekou. Musa stayed longest, helping Kadidiatou organize papers, labeling the envelope carefully. Babakar stayed until the end, sleeping beside her, even when space no longer required it. When the room finally emptied, the silence felt heavier than hunger. Kadidiatou sat alone on the mat, the envelope in her hands. She did not open it. She only whispered, "Go far, go safe." Outside, the city swallowed her sons one by one. It did not know it had just released a reckoning into the world. The room changed after the boys left. It did not grow quieter. Dakar was never quiet, but the sounds lost their meaning. Kadidiatou Coulibaly learned the difference between absence and emptiness. Absence had echoes. Emptiness did not. Musa Traoré stayed the longest. He slept on the floor near the door, as if guarding something fragile. In the mornings, he walked Kadidiatou to the tap and carried water back himself. He organized the metal box, wrapping the envelope in cloth and labeling it with careful handwriting, not to hide it, but to remember where it belonged. "You don't have to carry this alone," he told her once. Kadidiatou smiled faintly. "I already did." He shook his head. "You don't anymore." They spoke in fragments those days, conversations shaped by caution. The city had grown curious again. Faces lingered. Questions hovered without landing. Someone had noticed the boys leaving in different directions. Someone always noticed. The truth came out slowly, like a wound exposed to air. Kadidiatou chose the evening when the heat softened and the alley smelled of cooking oil. She sat on the mat and motioned for Musa to sit across from her. Between them, she placed the envelope. "I need you to hear this," she said. "Not as my son, as a man." Musa nodded. His face was composed, but his hands betrayed him. Fingers interlaced too tightly. 30 years ago, Kadidiatou began. There was a neighborhood near the railway line. Poor people, vendors, families who had lived there longer than I'd been alive. Musa listened, eyes fixed. One morning, trucks arrived. Men with papers. They said the land was needed. They said the signatures were legal. She paused, swallowing. They were not. She described the eviction as she had never allowed herself to. Before the way women screamed as doors were torn open, the way children clung to pots and blankets, the way men were beaten for asking questions. She described the courtroom, too, the echoing hall, the lawyer who spoke quickly, the judge who never looked at the families. "I was cleaning that building," she said. "I heard everything." Musa leaned forward. "You saw proof." "Yes, and you testified no." The word fell hard. "They came to me that night," Kadidiatou continued. "They said I was a nobody. They said accidents happened. Then they put money on the table. More than I had ever seen." Musa closed his eyes. "I took it," she said. "I told myself I was choosing life." "What happened to the families?" Musa asked quietly. Kadidiatou shook her head. "They scattered. Some went to relatives. Some slept on streets. Some disappeared. Silence stretched. A motorbike passed outside. Somewhere a radio played a love song too loudly. I kept copies," Kadidiatou said, "because part of me knew silence was wrong, because another part hoped one day I'd be brave." Musa opened the envelope carefully. Inside were yellow documents, names written in ink that had bled with time. He read slowly. His breath hitched once. "My mother's name," he whispered. Kadidiatou closed her eyes. "I didn't know then. I swear I didn't." Musa did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was steady but changed. "This land," he said, tapping a document. "It was taken by a company tied to Alhaji Boubacar Sissoko." Kadidiatou nodded. "He was powerful then. He's stronger now." Musa looked up. "This isn't just history." "No," Kadidiatou agreed. "It's a pattern. They did not decide anything that night. Decisions made in anger often repeated the same violence they claimed to fight. They slept with the envelope between them like a third presence." In the weeks that followed, Musa began to leave early and return late. He visited the library, the courthouse steps, the old neighborhood by the railway line. He listened more than he spoke. He found names etched into memory and fear. Meanwhile, letters arrived, irregular, brief, precious. From Ibrahima, "Work is hard. I am learning roots. I send what I can." From Kofi, "Numbers make sense everywhere. I'm careful." From Sekou, "Machines are the same in every city. People are not." From Babacar, dictated through a neighbor's phone, "Mama, I remember the rules." Kadidiatou read each letter twice, then folded it carefully. The city tightened around her. A man asked questions at the tap. A woman warned her not to walk alone at night. The landlord raised rent without explanation. Kadidiatou understood the message. Attention had returned. Amadou Keita visited again, older and more tired than before. "I can help you prepare," he said. "Not to accuse, to document." Kadidiatou nodded. "I'm done hiding." Amadou glanced at Musa. "And you?" Musa met his gaze. "I'll do the listening." They worked quietly, slowly. They photographed documents. They cross-referenced names. They located families who still remembered the eviction. Some refused to speak. Some cried. Some had been waiting for someone to ask. One evening, Musa came home pale. "They're watching," he said. "Sissoko's people." Kadidiatou sat down. "Then we do nothing reckless." "Doing nothing is what put us here," Musa replied, not unkindly. She smiled sadly. "Doing everything at once is how people disappear." They compromised. Evidence first, safety always. The decision for Musa to leave came without ceremony. Dakar had become too small. He would go to Accra first, then farther if needed. Distance would protect him and widen his reach. On his last night, Kadidiatou cooked their best meal in months. They ate slowly, honoring something unspoken. "You didn't steal my life," Musa said suddenly. "You gave it direction." Kadidiatou's eyes filled. "I stole time from others," she whispered. Musa shook his head. "You kept the truth alive. That matters." When he left at dawn, Kadidiatou stood at the doorway and did not wave. She watched until the street swallowed him. Alone again, she returned the envelope to the metal box. The truth was no longer just hers. It was moving now through cities, through hands, through memory. And somewhere, men who had built empires on silence were beginning to feel the ground shift beneath their feet. The separations did not happen all at once. They never did. They unfolded like a slow dismantling piece by piece, memory by memory, until Kadidiatou Coulibaly woke one morning and realized there were no footsteps left to count. Ibrahima Diallo sent money first. Not much, never enough to feel secure, but consistent. He worked long routes, now driving trucks across borders where uniforms changed, but suspicion stayed the same. His letters were brief, practical. "I sleep in the cab. It's safer. I've learned which roads to avoid." Kofi Mensah wrote less often, but when he did, his words carried optimism, sharpened by caution. "I'm learning how businesses hide their losses. Numbers tell the truth if you ask them the right way." Sekou Kamara's messages came through borrowed phones, always late at night. "Fixed a generator today. They paid fairly. I don't talk much. It keeps me invisible." Babacar Ndiaye sent voice notes whenever he could. His voice grew deeper, steadier, but he still asked the same question at the end. "Mama, are you eating?" Kadidiatou answered every message. She never mentioned how thin the rice had become or how the landlord's knocks grew more frequent. She never described the way her body tired faster now or how silence crept into her bones at night. She chose what mothers always chose, protection through omission. Time passed. Months turned into years. Dakar changed the way cities do. New buildings rising beside old wounds, fresh paint covering cracks without fixing foundations. The port expanded. The market grew louder. And somewhere between survival and memory, Kadidiatou aged. Her hands stiffened, her eyesight softened. The work she once did with speed now required pauses. Employers noticed. Some replaced her quietly, others stopped calling altogether. The envelope remained. It rested beneath the mat, wrapped carefully, a weight she did not remove, even when moving rooms became necessary. When the landlord finally forced her out, too many complaints, too much attention, Kadidiatou did not argue. She packed what little she owned and moved to a smaller place, farther from the center, closer to the edges where people learned not to ask questions. She told herself it was temporary. Temporary stretched. Moussa Traoré became harder to reach. His letters came from different cities, different numbers. Each one carried careful phrasing words, shaped to survive interception. Progress is slow but real. People remember more than they admit. Amadou Keita aged quickly. When he visited, his hands shook more, his optimism thinned. "They still have power," he warned. "And patience." Kadidiatou nodded. "So do we." But patience took a toll. The day Kadidiatou fell on the stairs and did not get up right away, she knew something had shifted. A neighbor found her hours later, confused but alive. The clinic was overcrowded. The doctor spoke plainly. "You shouldn't live alone." Alone. The word tasted bitter. The decision was not hers alone this time. Ibrahima called from a border town. His voice carried guilt like static. "Mama, you can't stay like this." Kofi joined the call from another line. "There's a place, not good, but safe." Babacar cried quietly in the background. And so, Kadidiatou Coulibaly entered the care home. It was not advertised as such. It called itself a community residence. The building was old, the paint tired. The staff spoke kindly on good days and sharply on others. Most residents had been placed there by relatives who visited rarely, if at all. Kadidiatou brought her metal box. The envelope came with her. At first she adjusted. She learned which nurses ignored requests and which listened. She shared stories with women who no longer remembered their own names. She folded clothes for those who could not. But aging like poverty compounded. Her legs weakened. Her memory faltered in small ways. Names came slower. Dates blurred. The boys' men now called when they could. Visits were promised, delayed, promised again. Borders closed, jobs tightened, life interfered. Kadidiatou did not resent them. She understood sacrifice intimately. What she did not understand was how quickly dignity disappeared when no one was watching. The care home changed managers. Rules multiplied. Staff turnover grew. Food portions shrank. Complaints vanished into paperwork. Kadidiatou spoke up when she saw a resident ignored. When medicine went missing, when voices grew cruel, she became inconvenient. "You ask too many questions," a nurse told her once. Kadidiatou smiled faintly. "I learned that from hunger." The warning came quietly. One afternoon, a man visited the home asking questions about a former neighborhood near the railway line. His tone was casual. His eyes were not. Kadidiatou felt the past stir. That night she hid the envelope deeper, wrapping it again and again as if cloth could muffle consequence. The next week, her name appeared on a list. "Discharge the administrator," said flatly. "Non-compliance. I have nowhere to go," Kadidiatou replied. "That's not our responsibility." She tried calling Ibrahima. No answer. Kofi's line rang without connection. Seku's phone was off. Babakar's message did not deliver. On the morning they wheeled her out just before dawn, Kadidiatou understood something she had avoided for years. Silence did not just multiply. It waited. She held the plastic bag containing her clothes. The metal box rested against her leg, heavier than ever. The gate closed behind her with a finality that felt rehearsed. She did not cry. If this was the price of telling the truth, late she would pay it standing. What Kadidiatou did not know, what no one in that quiet street knew, was that years of distance had not erased her son's promise. It had sharpened it, and far from the care home, 5 men were already moving. Not as children, not as victims, but as witnesses who had finally gathered enough weight to bend the world back toward justice. The men who called themselves the 5 did not announce their arrival anywhere. They never had. In Accra, they were known as quiet investors who asked too many questions. In Abidjan, as logistics partners who paid on time and left no trails. In Lagos, as donors who funded clinics without ceremonies. In Dakar, they were little more than a rumor. 5 names that never appeared together on paper. 5 signatures that never overlapped. 5 shadows moving along the edges of systems built to forget people, like Kadidiatou Coulibaly. They had learned discretion the hard way. Ibrahima Diallo stood at the center of it now. Not as a leader, he refused the title, but as a point of gravity. He knew roads, he knew borders, he knew which authorities could be avoided and which must be faced head-on. Years behind a steering wheel had taught him how power moved, not loudly, but persistently. Kofi Mensah handled the numbers. He had grown into them, sharpening intuition into discipline. He could read a balance sheet, like a confession tracing lies through decimals, spotting fear in inflated costs. He never forgot the market stalls where he learned to count under pressure, or the night Kadidiatou pushed tainted money back into Ibrahima's hands. Moussa Traoré worked the archives of memory. He had studied law in pieces online courses. Night classes borrowed notes and learned the art of listening from his mother's silence. He built timelines patiently, mapping testimonies against records that had been altered, but not erased. When people spoke to him, they felt seen, not interrogated. Sekou Kamara built the machines that kept them invisible, secure networks, backup generators, redundant systems that hummed quietly and never asked questions. He fixed things that broke and improved things that didn't, preferring function over recognition. He believed reliability was its own kind of justice. Babacar Ndiaye carried the human ledger. He remembered faces, birthdays, small promises made in passing. He managed the foundations, they funded the shelters, they rebuilt the children they fed. He insisted on names. Numbers without names, he said, were how people disappeared. They did not meet often. Distance protected them. When they did, it was brief, purposeful, and never sentimental. Until Dakar. The call came through a back channel Musa had kept alive for years. It was a message forwarded twice, stripped of context. Kadidiatou Coulibaly, discharged, no family. Early morning. The room went still. Ibrahima read it once, then again. The old reflex run-hide, survive, flared, and died. This was not a moment for instinct. It was a moment for alignment. Confirm, he said. Kofi was already typing. Sekou checked routes. Babakar opened a list of contacts. Musa pulled out a thin folder labeled with a date 30 years old. They confirmed quickly. Kadidiatou had been wheeled out before dawn. The care home claimed policy. Staff refused comment. A man with ties to Alhaji Bubachar Sissoko had visited days earlier, asking questions that never appeared in official logs. The pattern was familiar. They convened not physically, but through a secure line that had carried them through worse. "We bring her home," Babakar said immediately. "Define home," Kofi replied. "Somewhere safe," Babakar shot back. "Somewhere she's not erased," Musa interjected calmly. "If we move now, we expose ourselves before the evidence is ready." Ibrahima listened, weighing risk like cargo. "Both are true," he said. "So we do both." They split tasks without ceremony. Sekou rerouted vehicles, not flashy, clean, unmarked, ordinary. Kofi shifted funds quietly, masking transfers through legitimate payrolls. Babakar contacted a trusted caregiver network. Musa prepared a brief, not to file yet, but to hold. Ibrahima flew in last. He did not go straight to the care home. He watched first. He learned the guards' patterns, the shift changes, the blind spots where cameras lied. He remembered being a boy, watched too closely, and applied the lesson in reverse. When the vehicles finally stopped at the curb, it was with precision. 5 cars, same moment, engines idling low. They did not wear insignia. Their suits were chosen to disappear into any crowd, any city. They ignored the guards because attention was a currency they refused to spend. Kadidiatou Coulibaly sat on a wheelchair by the gate, a thin blanket across her knees, a plastic bag at her feet. The metal box rested against her shin like an old friend. She looked smaller than memory. Ibrahima knelt first, not as a gesture, as a reflex learned long before power. "Mama," he said, voice steady and breaking at once. "We're here." The others followed, 5 men kneeling on concrete that had once scraped their childhood knees. Kadidiatou stared at them. Her eyes searched faces, lines, time. Recognition came slowly, then all at once. "Ibrahima," she whispered. "Kofi, Sekou, Musa, Babakar." Her hands trembled. Babakar took them gently, grounding her. They did not explain. Explanations could wait. They lifted her carefully, as if lifting history itself, and moved with purpose. No shouting, no speeches, just motion done right. The vehicles pulled away before the care home found its voice. They did not go to a mansion. They did not go to a hotel. They went to a modest house with ramps instead of stairs, light instead of echo, staff who spoke softly because they were paid to care, not control. Babakar stayed with her through the night. Sekou checked power twice. Kofi reviewed bills without complaint. Musa placed the metal box in a safe and sat beside it, not opening it. Ibrahima stood by the window until dawn. By morning, Dakar was awake. News traveled faster now, carried by whispers and phones. A rumor formed, then another. "Did you see the cars? Who was that old woman? Why 5 men?" Alhaji Bubachar Sissoko noticed the tremor. He had built his empire on distance from consequence. He had outlived accusations before, but this felt different. Organized, intentional, patient. He ordered checks. Names surfaced. Connections aligned. The 5. He smiled thinly. So he said to no one the children grew up. What Sissoko did not know, what he could not know, was that the 5 had not come to negotiate. They had come to finish something that began under a railway line 30 years ago. And this time, Kadidiatou Coulibaly would not be left standing alone at the gate. Alhaji Boubacar Sissoko did not panic. Men like him never did. Panic was for people who believed power could be lost suddenly. Sissoko believed power eroded slowly, if at all, and only when neglected. He had survived ministers, journalists, activists, even judges who briefly remembered their duty before forgetting it again. He had learned the rhythm of consequence, delay, distract, deny. So when reports reached him that 5 men had removed Kadidiatou Coulibaly from a care home before sunrise, he did not shout. He did not threaten. He asked questions. Who signed the transfer? No one. Who authorized the vehicles? No record. Who are they? Unknown. Unknown was a word Sissoko disliked. He stood at the window of his office, overlooking the city, hands clasped behind his back, watching traffic thicken like blood in an artery. Dakar had grown under his watch. Roads, ports, housing projects, his fingerprints were everywhere, faint enough to deny, deep enough to endure. He turned to his aide. "Find the cleaning woman." "She's gone, sir." "Then find the men." That afternoon, the pressure began. A call reached the caregiver network Boubacar had arranged. Polite, curious, asking for verification. Another call followed, less polite, hinting at regulatory inspections. By evening, a third call arrived, this one offering a generous partnership to take over care responsibilities. Boubacar declined all 3 without raising his voice. "They're testing boundaries," he told the others that night. "Seeing what moves, let them," Kofi said. "Every test leaves data." Musa was less relaxed. He spread documents across the table, timelines and names forming a web too dense to ignore. "They won't stop at pressure," he warned. "They'll try to discredit her." Kadidiatou sat quietly in the next room, wrapped in a shawl Boubacar had brought. Her strength returned slowly. Her mind, however, was sharp. "They always attack the witness," she said when Musa told her. "It's easier than attacking the truth." Ibrahima leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "We're ready. Ready for what Kadidiatou asked, for whatever they try." She studied him, really studied him. The boy who once slept under a bridge now carried himself like a man who had learned patience the hard way. "No," she said gently. "You're ready to protect, not to rush." Ibrahima nodded. He trusted her judgment more than his own. The first strike came 2 days later. A report surfaced online, shared rapidly through local groups and forwarded by accounts with no history. It accused Kadidiatou Coulibaly of blackmail, claiming she had fabricated documents to extort a prominent businessman in exchange for silence. The language was polished, legal-sounding, dangerous. Kofi read it once and smiled thinly. Too clean. Musa scanned the claims. They referenced the railway line eviction. Kadidiatou closed her eyes. So they remember. Within hours, a summons arrived, informal but pointed. Authorities wanted Kadidiatou to clarify discrepancies. The implication was clear. Cooperate quietly or be dragged publicly. Boubacar looked sick. "They're turning her into the criminal." "They always do," Kadidiatou said. "It's familiar." Ibrahima slammed his fist into his palm, once then stopped himself. "We go public!" Musa shook his head. "Not yet." "Why wait?" Ibrahima demanded. "They're coming for her now." Because Musa replied evenly, "They want us to react without structure. If we do, they control the frame." Silence settled. The room hummed softly from Seku's generators, steady and reliable. Kadidiatou spoke. "I won't run." No one asked her to. They decided on a narrow path forward, measured, exposed enough to prevent disappearance, contained enough to avoid chaos. Kadidiatou would appear, but not alone. She would answer questions, but not all of them. They would force the system to choose between spectacle and process. Amadou Keita joined them the next morning, his face drawn but resolute. "They're pushing fast," he said. "That means something scared them." Good, Kofi replied. "Fear leaks." They prepared Kadidiatou carefully, not with clothes meant to impress, but with dignity. She wore a simple dress, clean and unadorned. Babacar braided her hair slowly, hands gentle. "If they try to humiliate you," he said quietly, "remember you raised 5 men who learned patience from hunger." Kadidiatou smiled. "I remember." The building where she was to appear was crowded, not with journalists yet, but with curiosity. Phones hovered, whispers passed. Inside, an official greeted her with forced warmth. "Madame Coulibaly, thank you for coming." She nodded. "I always come when called." The questions were polite at first. Dates, names, circumstances. Then they sharpened. "Why did you keep these documents?" "Because they were mine." "Why present them now?" "Because silence expires." "Who funds you?" "My conscience." A murmur rippled. Then came the accusation, delivered casually as if rehearsed. "Isn't it true? The official said that you approached Alhaji Bubachar Sissoko for money in exchange for withholding testimony." Kadidiatou did not raise her voice. "Number. Do you have proof?" She nodded once. Musa stepped forward, not aggressively, just enough to be seen. He placed a file on the table. "Copies," he said. "Stamped, dated, corroborated." The official stiffened. "Who are you?" "Someone who listened when no one else would." Phones rose higher now. Outside, the crowd grew. The rumor had legs. By evening, the story had split in 2 directions, one accusing an old woman of fraud, the other questioning why a decades-old eviction still had answers no one wanted to hear. Sissoko watched it unfold from his office expression. Unreadable. "They're careful," he admitted. "Too careful." His aide hesitated. "What do we do?" Sissoko turned slowly. "We remind them who writes endings." That night a car followed Babacar home and peeled away at the last turn. A message arrived on Sekou's secure line. Nothing explicit, just coordinates he recognized as a warning. Ibrahima noticed unfamiliar faces near the house and adjusted routes without comment. The pressure was tightening. Kadidiatou sat with Musa, after midnight tea, cooling between them. "I never meant to become a battleground," she said softly. Musa shook his head. "You were always one. You just refused to surrender." She looked at him. "Promise me something, anything." "When this becomes loud," she said, "don't let it become cruel." Musa nodded. "That's the line we hold." Across the city, Alhaji Bubachar Sissoko drafted his next move, confident in a system he had bent for decades. What he did not see, what he had never learned to recognize, was resolve that had grown slowly away from his reach. The 5 had waited 30 years. They could wait a little longer. They decided to disappear without vanishing. It was Musa who framed it that way, his voice calm as he traced lines across a map spread on the table. The house was quiet except for the low, steady hum of Sekou's backup power. Outside, Dakar breathed in its usual rhythm, unaware of the careful choreography unfolding inside. "We stay visible enough that they can't make her disappear," Musa said, tapping the city center. "But invisible enough that they can't corner us." Ibrahima nodded. He understood movement. He understood when to be seen and when to become traffic. "We rotate," he said. "No patterns." Kofi added figures without looking up. "I'll keep the money boring. Salaries, invoices, rent. Nothing dramatic." Babacar glanced toward the room where Kadidiatou slept. "And her?" "She lives." Musa replied simply. "That's the point." Kadidiatou Coulibaly woke to mornings that felt borrowed. Light filtered through curtains chosen for softness rather than show. Tea arrived before she asked for it. Her legs grew stronger with careful exercise. She learned the house by touch and sound, the creak near the hallway, the step that needed fixing, the breeze that slipped through a window at dusk. She also learned the limits of protection. When she walked outside, phones lifted. When she sat at a cafe, conversations paused. Kindness existed, but so did curiosity sharpened by rumor. She kept her head high and her answers short. "I'm fine," she said. "I'm resting. I'm not afraid." It was the last one that surprised people. Musa worked like a shadow with a memory. He met former residents of the railway line neighborhood in places chosen for comfort rather than secrecy. Church courtyards, back rooms of tailors, a schoolyard after hours. He listened to stories that had been compressed by time into tight knots of pain. He recorded only when asked. He never promised outcomes. "They took our house." One woman said, her voice steady. "But they couldn't take our names." Musa wrote the name carefully. Amadou Keita joined him when his strength allowed. Together they compared notes aligning testimony with documents that had survived floods, fires, and indifference. They discovered patterned shell companies that changed names, like seasoned signatures that reappeared across decades, officials who rose and fell but never quite left. "The case isn't one event," Amadou said one afternoon, rubbing his temples. "It's a system." "Systems fall when they're named," Musa replied. Meanwhile, pressure found new shapes. A letter arrived for Kadidiatou official, and Cold requesting another clarification. Babacar read it aloud, his jaw tight. "They want to exhaust you," he said. Kadidiatou smiled faintly. "They're late." She attended some meetings and declined others, always with counsel present, always with witnesses. She spoke plainly and without anger. She told the same story every time. Consistency became her shield. Ibrahima noticed the watchers change. The men near the corner were replaced by different men with the same shoes. Cars lingered, then didn't. He adjusted Root's timing posture. He slept lightly. Sekou fortified the quiet. He installed redundancies that failed gracefully and alarms that whispered rather than screamed. He trained the staff to notice absence, not noise. When a camera went dark for 2 seconds one night, he found the cut before it mattered. Kofi tracked the money behind the pressure. He noticed a donation withdrawn here, a sponsorship canceled there. Small punishments meant to signal reach. He countered with patience, redistributing funds to keep caregivers paid and groceries delivered. No headlines, no applause. Babacar stayed with Kadidiatou most evenings, reading to her when her eyes tired. He chose stories about people who endured without being celebrated. When she slept, he sorted letters from the boy's old friends' neighbors who had heard the rumor and wanted to help. The past refused to stay buried. One evening, Musa returned late, his expression altered by something he had not expected. "They found me," he said quietly. Everyone stilled. "Who?" Ibrahima asked. "Someone who worked the eviction," Musa replied. "A clerk. He was young then. He's old now. He wants to talk." They arranged the meeting in daylight in a place with children playing nearby. The clerk's hands shook as he spoke. "We forged dates," he admitted. "We destroyed files. I kept one copy because I was afraid. I didn't know who to give it to." He slid a folder across the table. Musa did not touch it immediately. "Why now?" The clerk swallowed. "Because my grandson sleeps on the floor. Because I see your mother on the news. Because silence doesn't let you rest." The folder filled a gap they had not known how to bridge. Kadidiatou held it later, her hands steady. "I remember his face," she said softly. "He wouldn't look at us." She placed the folder beside the envelope she had carried for 30 years. 2 weights balanced at last. The warning came the next day. An anonymous message reached Babacar's phone, vague, threatening, meant to unsettle rather than instruct. Sekou traced its path to a relay used by contractors with old ties to Sissoko's companies. There, frustrated, Kofi observed. "Mistakes increase when patience runs out." Ibrahima disagreed. Or violence. They adjusted again. Kadidiatou insisted on attending a small community gathering that evening. "If I hide now," she said, "they win." The gathering was modest plastic chairs, soft voices, a few cameras. Kadidiatou spoke briefly, thanking people for their concern and asking for one thing. "Tell your stories," she said. "Not for me, for yourselves." Applause rose, careful but real. Afterward, as they walked back to the car, a man stepped too close. Ibrahima shifted instantly, placing himself between. The man muttered an apology and melted away, leaving behind the metallic taste of danger. That night, Musa spread the full timeline on the table. It was complete. Now documents, testimonies, financial trails, and a pattern of intimidation that linked past to present. "We're ready," he said. Ready for what Babakar asked, though he knew. "For the moment, they can't control," Musa replied. "A public reckoning with rules." Ibrahima exhaled slowly. "They'll try to stop it." "Of course," Kofi said. "That's how we'll know it matters." Kadidiatou listened, her hands folded in her lap. When they finished, she spoke. "Don't make me the center," she said. "Make the truth the center." Musa nodded, agreed. They chose the venue, carefully official enough to compel attendance, public enough to resist erasure. Notices went out. Invitations were delivered with proof attached. The system responded as expected. Delays, objections, requests for postponement. They refused politely. On the eve of the hearing, Kadidiatou slept poorly. Babakar sat with her until dawn, holding her hand as he had when he was small. "I'm proud of you," he said. She squeezed back. "I'm proud of who you became." Across the city, Alhaji Bubachar Sissoko prepared his own strategy, confident that noise could drown memory. What he did not account for was a truth carried patiently for 30 years, now held by many hands. And patience, once shared, becomes momentum. The morning of the hearing arrived without ceremony. No sirens, no crowds yet, just a pale sky, and the low ordinary sounds of a city waking up to routines that did not include justice. Kadidiatou Coulibaly dressed slowly, her movements careful, deliberate. Babakar tied her scarf the way she liked it, secure, simple. She looked at herself in the mirror and did not search for strength. She searched for steadiness. Outside, Ibrahima checked the perimeter. Kofi scanned messages and balances one last time. Sekou tested systems that never announced themselves. Musa stood apart, reading the same page twice without seeing it. They had agreed on the rules. No speeches outside the room. No confrontations without witnesses. No improvisation, unless necessary. And above all, no retreat. The building chosen for the hearing was neither grand nor hidden. A government annex near the city center, its walls scarred by old posters and newer paint. It had been selected precisely because it belonged to no one important enough to shut it down quietly. By the time they arrived, people had gathered. Journalists with small cameras, community members with folded papers, former residents of the railway line neighborhood, older now standing straighter than memory allowed. Phones were raised, whispers braided through the air. Kadidiatou entered supported by Babakar and Musa, her pace unhurried. She did not smile. She did not frown. She carried herself the way she always had, like someone who had learned that dignity was not granted by rooms. Inside, officials shuffled papers. A clerk called names. Seats filled. Then Alhaji Bubakar Sissoko arrived. He entered as he always did, late enough to be noticed, early enough to control the tone. His suit was immaculate. His smile practiced. He nodded at people who mattered and ignored the rest. When his eyes found Kadidiatou, they lingered for half a second longer than politeness required. Recognition flickered. So did calculation. The opening statements were procedural. Dates, jurisdiction, purpose. Sissoko's lawyer spoke smoothly about misunderstandings and long-settled matters. He suggested compassion for an elderly woman confused by time and manipulation. Kadidiatou listened without interruption. Then it was Musa's turn. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse. He presented. He laid out the timeline documents, first testimonies, second patterns, last. He named shell companies and showed how they changed names without changing hands. He displayed copies of signatures that appeared decades apart on different land transfers. "This is not a mistake," Musa said evenly. "It's a method." The room shifted. Sissoko's lawyer objected. Procedural issues, relevance, time limits. The chair overruled him once, then twice. Then Sissoko himself spoke. "Madam Coulibaly," he said, standing, "I sympathize with your hardship, but these accusations—" "They are not accusations," Kadidiatou interrupted calmly. "They are memories with receipts." A murmur rose. Sissoko smiled thinly. "You accepted money." Kadidiatou nodded. "Yes." The room froze. "You see?" Sissoko said, turning slightly. "She admits it." Kadidiatou did not look away. "I accepted money to stay silent, and silence did exactly what it was paid to do." Her voice did not tremble. "It erased families. It taught children that homes can be taken without consequence. It taught me that survival without truth is a long punishment." The chair leaned forward. Sissoko's lawyer scoffed. "This is emotional testimony." Kadidiatou met his gaze. "Then explain why your client's name appears on every transfer." Musa placed the clerk's folder on the table. "This document was hidden for 30 years, he said. Not by my client, by a clerk who was afraid. Today, he chose to speak." The clerk stood shaking but upright. He confirmed signatures. He confirmed dates. He confirmed pressure. Sissoko's smile faded. Then came the move they had expected. A side door opened. An official announced a temporary suspension due to security concerns. A vague threat. A familiar tactic. The room erupted. "No," someone shouted. "Let her speak." We waited 30 years. Phones lifted higher. Live streams began. Kadidiatou stood slowly. "If you suspend this," she said, her voice carrying you, "prove why it matters." The chair hesitated. The official retreated. The hearing continued. Then it happened. 5 men stood, not together, not theatrically, one by one from different rows, different angles, like witnesses, answering a call they had rehearsed for a lifetime. Ibrahima Diallo stood first. "I was a child sleeping under a bridge when Kadidiatou Coulibaly took me in," he said. "I learned roots, not crimes." Kofi Mensah stood next. "I learned numbers from hunger," he said. "I learned fairness from her." Sekou Kamara stood. "I learned how to fix what people throw away," he said, "including us." Babacar and Diaye stood voice steady. "I learned names matter," he said. "Mine mattered because she said it." Finally, Musa stood again, not as counsel, but as son. "My family lost our home in the eviction you're discussing," he said. "She didn't know. She still fed me." The room was silent now. Cameras whirred. Journalists leaned forward. Sissoko's lawyer whispered urgently. Sissoko stared, no longer calculating, now assessing damage. Then the 5 did the unthinkable. Kofi placed a document on the table. "We are not here to ask for mercy," he said. "We are here to offer resolution." Babacar followed. "We have purchased the care home where Kadidiatou was expelled." A gasp rippled. Ibrahima continued. "We have secured funding to restore land to surviving families through legal compensation, not favors." Sekou added quietly. "And we've ensured every transaction is transparent." Musa finished. "We are not seeking power. We are returning it." The chair stared. "Who are you?" 5 voices answered, not in unison but in harmony. The children no one wanted. Outside, the crowd surged. Sissoko rose abruptly. "This is a stunt!" Kadidiatou looked at him, then really looked. "No," she said softly. "It's a return." The hearing adjourned, not suspended, but advanced. Investigations announced. Accounts frozen pending review. Names requested. Sissoko left without shaking hands. Outside, cameras swarmed. The 5 shielded Kadidiatou without hiding her. She stood small and unbowed as questions flew. "Why now?" someone shouted. Kadidiatou answered simply, "Because truth is patient, and so were we." That night, as Dakar replayed the footage again and again, Alhaji Bubachar Sissoko sat alone in his office, staring at a city he no longer controlled the way he once had. He had underestimated two things: time and love that refused to stay small. The hearing did not end when the room emptied. It spilled. By evening, Dakar was louder than it had been in years, not with celebration but with recognition. Radios replayed the testimony. Phones passed videos hand to hand. Names long buried surfaced in public conversation, pronounced carefully at first, then with growing confidence. The railway line neighborhood, once a footnote, returned to the city's mouth, like a word remembered at the right time. Alhaji Bubachar Sissoko did not sleep. He paced his office while aides whispered updates. Accounts flagged, partners calling, a minister declining dinner. Small things individually survivable together, destabilizing. He had built his power on predictability, on knowing which doors would open and which would close. That night, doors hesitated. "Contain it," he said finally. Tomorrow. Containment was his craft. The counterattack came at dawn. A press statement circulated, polished and immediate, casting doubt on the hearing's integrity. It questioned the credibility of witnesses, hinted at foreign funding, suggested the emotional manipulation of an elderly woman by ambitious men. It was not a denial, it was a fog. Kofi read it once and set it aside. They're buying time. Time for what Babakar asked. For leverage, Musa replied. Or disappearance. Ibrahima tightened the security rotation. "We don't move her." Kadidiatou sat with her tea, listening. She had slept better than she expected, deep, dreamless. When she looked up, her eyes were clear. "They won't disappear me now," she said calmly. "They need me visible." Musa nodded. Visibility with rules. The rules held until they didn't. By mid-morning, an emergency injunction was announced. The investigation would be paused pending review of procedural complaints, a familiar maneuver dressed as neutrality. The pause was meant to drain momentum, to cool outrage into fatigue. Outside the courthouse, people gathered anyway. Former residents of the railway line arrived in small groups, then larger ones. Some carried faded photographs, others carried nothing but their names. Journalists followed the movement, sensing a story that refused to shrink. Kadidiatou insisted on going. "This isn't about me," she said. "It's about them." The five debated, then agreed on one condition: no microphones unless asked, no speeches unless necessary. Presence, not performance. They arrived to a crowd that parted instinctively, not out of fear but respect. Kadidiatou stood among people who looked like her past, older, weathered, uncelebrated. She listened as stories rose around her, overlapping and imperfect, but unmistakably aligned. A woman spoke of a door ripped from its hinges. A man described sleeping on cement with his children. Another pointed to the documents Musa had shared online. Overnight names circled, signatures compared. "This isn't new," someone said loudly. "It's just finally being heard." Inside the building, officials watched the gathering grow and felt the pause slip. By noon, the chair of the hearing requested an emergency session open, recorded, and public. The injunction would be addressed immediately. Sissoko arrived again, his composure thinner now. His lawyer argued forcefully, citing process and risk. Musa responded with restraint, pointing to the volume of corroboration and the danger of delay to witnesses. The chair asked one question that changed the room. "Madam Coulibaly," he said, "if the pause stands, what happens next?" Kadidiatou stood slowly. She did not raise her voice. "Then people learn," she said. "They learn that rules protect those who can wait, and that justice is something the poor are asked to postpone." Silence followed. Outside, the crowd began to chant, not slogans, not demands, names. Names of families, names of streets erased, names returned to air. The chair swallowed. The pause is lifted. Sissoko's lawyer objected. Overruled. The session resumed with urgency. Then came the second unthinkable. Kofi placed a sealed packet before the chair. "This is not evidence," he said. "It's accountability." Inside were agreements legally binding, irrevocable, executed through transparent trusts. They committed funds to restore and compensate families displaced by the railway line eviction, independent of the hearing's outcome. No naming rights, no control clauses. Audited public. "This is not a bargain," Musa added. "It's a floor." The chair stared. "Why would you do this before a verdict?" Babakar answered quietly. "Because waiting would look like leverage." Sissoko stood abruptly. "You think money buys absolution?" Kadidiatou turned to him. "No," she said, "but it can buy repair." The room felt the shift then, not toward forgiveness, but toward consequence. A clerk entered with a note. The chair read it, then looked up. "Banking authorities have frozen accounts connected to the shell entities named," he announced. "Pending review." A murmur surged. Sissoko's phone vibrated. He ignored it. His lawyer whispered urgently. He shook his head, once too late for calm now. "I request adjournment," the lawyer said. The chair leaned forward. Denied. Testimony resumed, short, sharp, undeniable. A former security contractor described orders received. A surveyor confirmed altered boundaries. The clerk reiterated dates. Each piece clicked into place with the sound of inevitability. Outside, the chant quieted into attentive silence as word spread. People listened. By late afternoon, the chair spoke again. "Based on the evidence presented, this panel refers the matter for full criminal investigation and civil restitution," he said. "Effective immediately." Sissoko's face drained of color. "This is not a verdict," the chair continued. "It is a beginning." Sissoko rose. "You'll regret this." Kadidiatou met his eyes without heat. "I already did," she said, "for 30 years. He left without ceremony, the doors closing behind him, with a sound too final to be ignored. The cameras rushed forward. Questions flew. The 5 closed ranks, not to hide Kadidiatou, but to steady her. She raised a hand, asking for one moment. "I won't answer everything," she said. "But hear this." She turned to the crowd, then to the room. "Kindness doesn't erase harm," she said. "But it can keep truth alive long enough to be useful. I was afraid once. Many of us were. Today fear didn't win. Applause broke, not thunderous, but sustained. As evening settled, the crowd dispersed slowly, reluctant to release the moment. Families lingered, exchanging numbers, planning next steps. Journalists filed stories with care they did not usually afford such subjects. Back at the house, Kadidiatou rested, while the men debriefed quietly. Sekou checked systems. Kofi confirmed transfers. Musa drafted filings. Ibrahima stood watch. Babakar prepared supper. Kadidiatou called them in. "You did more than protect me," she said. "You returned something I thought I'd lost." "What?" Babakar asked. "My courage," she replied. That night, Dakar slept with windows open air, thick with a new possibility. It was not hope exactly. Hope had been promised too cheaply before. It was recognition. And recognition once shared has a way of demanding the rest. The days that followed did not rush toward happiness. They moved carefully, as if the city itself had learned restraint. Investigations expanded with a slowness that felt deliberate rather than obstructive. Files were requested, then requested again. Names surfaced in places where they had never appeared publicly. Some officials resigned quietly. Others spoke too much. The process did not offer the satisfaction of a clean ending, but it offered something more. Durable. Continuity. Kadidiatou Coulibaly returned to ordinary mornings. Tea. Sunlight. The soft ache in her knees that reminded her she was still here. Babakar kept the routine gentle, never hovering, always nearby. He read to her when her eyes tired, and she corrected him when he mispronounced names she had carried for decades. The house became a place of measured calm, not a fortress, not a spectacle. The care home was the first visible change. Within a week, its management was replaced by an independent board. The staff who had treated residents like burdens were dismissed. Wages were standardized. Food deliveries increased. Ramps replaced steps. The sign above the entrance was removed and replaced with a temporary one while paperwork finalized. Residents watched the changes with suspicion, learned from years of disappointment. Kadidiatou visited quietly without cameras. She sat with women who remembered nothing and men who remembered too much. She folded laundry again, not because she had to, but because it felt right. When the final paperwork came through, the new name appeared on the sign without ceremony, Kadidiatou Care Home. She touched the letters once and said nothing. The foundation followed. Slow, careful, public. Babacar insisted on transparency. No miracles, he said. Just systems that don't disappear. Funds were allocated to housing repairs, school fees, legal aid, and medical care. Each grant required names and follow-ups. Each report was published. There were no galas, no portraits, only work. Families from the railway line neighborhood began to receive notices, not promises, but confirmations. Compensation was not equal. Time had taken too much, but acknowledgement arrived with signatures that could not be erased. Musa attended the first civil hearing, without Kadidiatou. "You don't need to see this," he told her gently. She nodded. "I've seen enough." He presented with the calm of someone who had waited long enough to speak, precisely. The clerk testified again, steadier now. The surveyor confirmed boundaries. The pattern held. Sissoko did not appear that day. When he did, weeks later, it was with diminished certainty. The room did not lean toward him anymore. He spoke of misunderstandings and generosity. He denied intent. He avoided names. The chair listened. The process continued. Not all justice arrived at once. Some accounts unfroze slowly. Some partnerships dissolved without explanation. Some consequences would take years, but the direction was clear and direction mattered. The five did not celebrate. They met in the kitchen one evening, standing, because sitting felt too final. The work ahead was quieter now, heavier in different ways. "We keep going," Kofi said. "Slow." Ibrahima nodded. "Predictable." Sekou added, "Sustainable." Musa looked toward the window. "And kind," they agreed. Kadidiatou joined them, leaning lightly on Babacar's arm. "You did what I couldn't," she said. "You finished something I only carried." Ibrahima shook his head. "You started it." "No," she replied softly. "I survived it." They shared a meal without speeches. Rice, vegetables, laughter that arrived cautiously, then stayed. The city noticed the difference in small ways. Journalists began to ask better questions. A school administrator requested guidance on enrolling undocumented children. A clinic asked how to apply for support without publicity. People who had learned to whisper started to speak at normal volume. Kadidiatou received letters. Some thanked her. Others apologized. Many simply told stories they had never believed would be heard. She read each one and placed it back into the envelope she had carried for 30 years, now repurposed as a living archive. One afternoon, she asked to visit the old railway line. They went quietly. The tracks were still there, rusted but stubborn. New buildings stood where homes once did. Kadidiatou closed her eyes and listened. "I can hear them," she said. "They're still talking." Babacar squeezed her hand. "They're being answered." As weeks turned into months, Kadidiatou's health stabilized. She moved more easily. She laughed more often. Some nights she slept without dreaming. The five adjusted their lives around the work rather than away from it. Ibrahima reduced his routes and trained others. Kofi taught young vendors to read contracts. Sekou built systems for clinics that failed gracefully instead of catastrophically. Musa mentored students who asked hard questions. Babacar traveled between centers insisting on names and listening. They did not call themselves heroes. They called themselves responsible. On the anniversary of the hearing, a small gathering formed at the care home, not announced, not filmed. Residents sat in the shade. Caregivers stood nearby. A few families from the railway line attended with children who did not remember sleeping on cement. Kadidiatou spoke briefly. "I was afraid once," she said. "Fear kept me alive, but it also kept me quiet. Kindness kept me human, and patience, yours, made truth possible." She paused, then added, "Don't wait 30 years." Applause followed, gentle and real. That evening, as the sun lowered, Kadidiatou sat on the porch with Babacar. The metal box rested at her feet, lighter now, its contents shared. "Do you regret anything?" he asked. She considered the question carefully. "I regret silence," she said, "and I regret believing I was alone." He nodded. "What about now?" he asked. She smiled. "Now I'm home." The city moved on, as cities do, but it moved differently, with a memory that refused to be filed away. Justice had not arrived as thunder. It had arrived as care. And care, when practiced consistently, had proven itself to be the most unthinkable force of all. The story of Kadidiatou Coulibaly is not about miracles. It is about time. It is about how kindness, when practiced quietly and consistently, can outlive fear, poverty, and even injustice that seems too powerful to confront. Kadidiatou did not change the world with speeches or wealth. She changed it with presence, with food shared when she had little, with shelter offered when it cost her safety, with silence endured not because she believed it was right, but because she believed survival was necessary. And yet the deepest lesson of her life is this: survival alone is not the same as healing. For years, Kadidiatou carried a truth. She was too afraid to speak. That silence did not end the harm. It delayed justice and allowed the same wounds to repeat themselves in new forms, on new bodies, in new generations. But silence was not her final legacy. Courage was. The 5 boys she took in did not repay her with money or status. They repaid her with memory, with patience, with the decision to grow slowly, honestly, and responsibly until they were strong enough not to dominate the world but to correct it. This story reminds us that justice rarely arrives as a dramatic moment. More often, it arrives as care repeated over time, as systems built quietly, as truth spoken without cruelty, as accountability that does not need revenge to be complete. Kadidiatou teaches us that it is never too late to choose differently. That even when fear shaped our past decisions, courage can still shape our ending, and that the love we give to people the world has rejected does not disappear. It multiplies, often in ways we will never live long enough to predict. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear from you. What part stayed with you the most? What did it remind you of in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if you believe in stories that honor kindness, justice, healing, and second chances, consider subscribing to the channel. Like and share this story so it can reach someone who may need it today. This is how stories keep working long after they end.